Then we will move on to introduce our program today. Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
So our program today is Andy Cartmill. He'll be giving us a program on suicide prevention. Andrew Cartmill has 35 years of experience in health education. He has presented to local, regional, and national audiences concerning health and the nature of substance abuse disorders, gambling disorders, and suicide prevention and intervention. Since 1997, Andy has served as a senior program communication and education specialist with Washington County and is responsible for education and outreach. Andy is a certified trainer for suicide intervention programs, QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, and Assist, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. If you can please join me in welcoming Andy Cartmill.
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you for having me. Every time I talk to a Forest Grove Rotary or any Rotary club, I always say this, so I apologize if you've heard it several times, but it's always an honor to come to Rotary. I'm from a Rotary family. My dad was a district governor, and they traveled the world with Rotary. They have friends all over the world from Rotary. We had exchange students ever since I was a little kid, so Rotary was a big part of my life. And it's funny, the first time I ever spoke to a Rotary group, a club, was, and I told my dad, and I was expecting him to say, oh, that's great, and all this stuff, but the only thing he said is don't talk over 20 minutes. So I took that to heart, and I will do my very best to keep this kind of short, but there's information that I really want to share here, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. So again, my day job is I'm with Addiction Services. I'm against them. That's my general messaging, and I talk to a lot of people. I do 150 to 200 trainings or presentations a year, and I get to get out in the community and talk to people. About 8 years ago, I was asked if I could become a trainer for suicide intervention and suicide prevention. It made sense to me because in doing what I do on the substance use side of things, obviously there's a tie there. So it made a lot of sense for me to do that. I'm going to be upfront with you. Suicide had not really touched me that much. I'm from Bend. And my favorite coach, long after I graduated, had jumped off the school gym, and he died by suicide at school. And it affected me, but it didn't affect me on a day-to-day basis. It didn't affect me. I was very sad, but I was far enough removed where it didn't affect my everyday life. Well, stuff that all changed about 10 years ago. And since then, I've had family, friends, coworkers attempt and die by suicide. I don't want any more. And that's why I volunteered to do this. I want no more suicides. And so I educate as many people as I can about suicide, about resources that are available, about how people can get trained to talk to someone who might be having thoughts of suicide, because it's really personal to me. So I'm going to be just giving you a couple of slides here, and then I want to give you a scenario and kind of touch on some highlights here. The models that I teach, and the intervention models and the prevention models regarding suicide, are based on two premises. Number one, suicide is not about death as much as it is about pain. Suicide is less about death than it is about pain, about loss. But the thing is, loss to you is different than what loss is to me. Pain to you is different than what pain is to someone else. What matters is what it means to you. Every single one of us has taken a different life path to where we are right now. And the only thing I can tell you about that life path is it's different than mine. That's it. I have no idea what your home life is like. I have no clue the things you've seen, done, experienced. The only thing I can say for sure is it's different than me. But the other thing I can say with relative certainty is the paths that some of you have taken, even when you were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I will never relate to, ever. I talk to thousands of youth, and I've heard some of their paths, and it's incredible what they've been through at such a young age. I don't pretend to know what people have gone through. The reason I mention this is because I really want to put that idea in your head that your family members, your friends, your coworkers, the people in your life, their path is different than yours. Don't assume they see what you see. Our path is why we perceive things the way we do, the way we look at things the way we do. Oftentimes the go-to, if we think someone is having thoughts of suicide, is we start pointing out strengths, reasons to live. Have you even considered the idea? And I get that. I'm no different. However, please understand that that individual might not see those strengths that you view as strengths. I was raised that suicide was one of the most selfish things anybody can do, period. I've learned since that to the individuals having thoughts of suicide, oftentimes it's the opposite. I'm doing my family a favor. When my nephew-in-law, my niece's husband, died by suicide in Hawaii, if I would have asked him before he did that, are you thinking about doing something stupid? His answer, no. Stupid. What I'm doing is my family a favor. Now, do you honestly believe my niece and their 8-year-old and 4-year-old felt they were done a favor? Of course not. But to Neil, they were. That's what he was doing. So you don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be a clinician. You just need to be you. That first premise, suicide is less about death than it is about pain, is followed by the second premise. The majority of individuals who have thoughts of suicide are ambivalent. They haven't fully decided to die. They may not have fully decided to live either. I don't want to die. I don't know what else to do. I got no choice. When we talk about hopelessness, by definition, hopeless means there is no way out, but we know there's a way out. We know there are other alternatives. But everybody's different. Everybody's path is different. So based on those two premises, I want to tell you that there is no such thing as a small act of kindness. No such thing. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be a clinician. I have no desire to change your thoughts and attitudes and feelings about suicide. You are who you are. But I will ask you, your thoughts, your attitudes, your feelings about suicide, how would it affect an intervention? If I wore a shirt and on it, there was writing that said, suicide is wrong. And I tooled around town, how you doing? Suicide's wrong. What's up? Check it out. Suicide is wrong. Do you see a disadvantage to that? Do you see a potential advantage? Maybe that individual was raised the way I was. Maybe that individual shares the same values I do. Maybe that person thinks that me thinking suicide is wrong is going to be more likely to talk me out of it. You don't have to be a professional. I don't want to change who you are. You are who you are. But you also don't have to fix all the time. As fixers, what do? We fix. Here's what you need to do. You need to do this, 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 this. And we're going to do it together, right? Sometimes you don't need to do that. Your willingness to listen can be profound. It is one of the most profound things that you can do for somebody is listen. Think about the last time you felt truly heard, truly listened to. It's a nice feeling, isn't it? So again, we don't have to fix. That willingness to listen to someone and to start to get involved by how you doing? Is everything okay? I noticed you were sad. Whatever. And listen to them. Suicide carries a stigma. I don't want to be viewed as weak, a loser. I don't want to be viewed as sick. So I don't say anything. I don't want to be judged. But oftentimes, that ambivalence, it creates silence. And when in assist to that training that Josh mentioned, the applied suicide intervention skill training, we talk about invitations being put out by individuals in hopes that someone will pick that up without saying, I'm thinking about suicide. I communicate in other ways. What we want to do is just listen. Trust your instincts. If somebody says something, does something that gives you a weird vibe for whatever reason, ask about it. It's okay. What about planting a seed about suicide? I don't want to mention suicide to somebody because if they're not thinking about it, I don't want them to start thinking about it. That's a myth. It is a myth. The individual is thinking about suicide or they're not. You asking is not going to change that. You know what the reality is? You asking is likely going to be met with relief. It's going to be de-escalating. It's going to lower stress. There's a theory, the prevailing theory as to why people attempt suicide. And it's by a guy named Thomas Joyner, Dr. Thomas Joyner. He's at Florida State. And he says the individual that attempts suicide possesses three components. Number one, a strong sense of burdensomeness. I'm a burden. It's more than just it's such an intense feeling that I'm a burden that I want to die. The second component, I don't belong. Who amongst us at some point in our lives has felt, I don't belong? It's a sad place to be, but this doesn't necessarily mean suicide. An individual can be thinking that I'm a burden, I don't belong, but it doesn't necessarily mean suicide. Dr. Joyner said there's a third component. We have a natural aversion to self-harm. I mean, it is hardwired, that beautiful brain, that amygdala creates fear for a reason. It creates fear and it puts us through a process called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Very cool. I could say fight, flight, or freeze, but it's like way cooler to say hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. But depending on our path, some of us fight, some of us flee, some of us freeze. We all don't act the same. Trauma and difficulties, we all react differently to them. And again, depending on our path, what's traumatic to one isn't traumatic to another. What matters is what it means to that individual. So, how do we find out if someone has experienced a loss in their life? How they feel about it? If they've lost a relationship, lost money, lost a job, how do we find out how they're feeling about it? We ask them. We don't need to overthink. We ask, and then we listen. It is a myth that you're going to plant a seed about suicide, but I don't want to get him mad at me. I don't want him to think that I think he's a loser, sick, mentally ill, weak. How often do you get mad when someone cares about you? You might get irritated. I get that. But do you get mad? Likely not. This is something we talk about. This is not something we keep quiet about. If you think someone is having thoughts of suicide, ask them and be direct. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? It is very important that the individual having these thoughts and the person that's caring about them are on the same page. And how do we get on the same page? We ask. And again, in QPR, we give suggestions on how to say things, but the one thing I always mention is this isn't a script. This is a guide for you to take into your world. Use your voice, use your words, be you. You don't need to say anything a certain way. Be you, but don't be afraid to get involved. Don't be afraid to ask. If the answer is yes, it's likely going to be met with relief. If the answer is no, wonderful. If the answer is no, but you're still getting a weird vibe and you're thinking something's up, it's okay to be a little persistent. It's okay. But much depends on the relationship you have with that individual. But above all, trust your instincts. trust them. Do not be afraid to get involved. And that involvement can come in the form as simple as, are you doing all right? I just noticed you were sad. I noticed this. How you doing? And listen. Again, for a fixer, it's one of the hardest things to do. When my daughter broke up with her boyfriend, I thought 3 days, you know, you'd be good to go, but like way wrong. And I'm doing daddy stuff after 3 days. And, you know, there's more fish in the sea. There's more, that guy's a jerk. He's his loss, you know. And she said, Dad, shut up. Just listen. For a fixer, it's one of the hardest things to do, isn't it? Don't ever underestimate the power of listening. There is no such thing as a small act of kindness. So that's the general premise here. But what I'd like to do is read a scenario to you, and I would love to get your reactions. So Carrie has been a coworker for 13 years. You consider yourselves friends, but you don't do too much together outside of work, except for maybe a few times a year. You're aware that Carrie's experienced some tough times. She recently lost her dad. She had a nasty falling out with a coworker. Her marriage is rocky, to put it mildly. Lately, her work has been subpar and her demeanor's been getting worse. Today, you saw her in the hall. You asked her how she was doing, and she said, honestly, not good, but whatever. I can't do this anymore. Hey, if I don't see you around, it's been fun. She walked away. What would you say to Carrie? I would love for you to feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. What would you say to Carrie? And remember, be direct, be honest, be yourself. I will wait for the responses to pour in.
How was this group?
It's a tough question to ask. You got to be prepared for the answer, but the question needs to be asked.
I think the best thing that I could say is, can we go someplace and have a cup of coffee and talk over this?
Nice. Good. What else? Who else would say something with your own voice? We teach kids to do this, youth. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say kids. We talk to our youth to practice saying no. And you know what? The research supports it. If I've practiced on how to say no, when I have the opportunity to use and someone offers me, it helps. This is an opportunity to practice. Someone said, what do you mean by that? What can I do to help you feel better? I love that question. What can I do? Oftentimes we try to make promises. Hey, you call me every day. You call me anytime. What if I'm not available? We want to avoid making promises we can't keep. Tomorrow you're gonna feel better. How do you know that? And I love the question, what can I do to help you? Because you know what it does? It lets that individual lead the conversation. It lets them tell you what it is they need. If you're willing and you're able to do that, wonderful. If you're not, maybe someone else can. But at the very least, you're listening. You see the difficulty in this? If I'm asking my kids this question, are you thinking about suicide? That's a lot different than asking a coworker. And again, you have to be prepared for the answer. But please understand, you are not going to plant a seed. You are not going to get the person to start thinking about suicide. That's already happened or it hasn't. But what you're showing is respect and caring enough. If that person thinks that I don't belong, no one cares, and all I am is a burden. that simple act of what you did. What can I do? Can we go for coffee? You have no idea how that can change a trajectory of thought. Don't be afraid to get involved. We talk a lot about resilience, and I don't know you folks, I don't, but you're Rotarians, so I know you're good people, right? But I don't know you. And we talk a lot about that, how bad things happen, and how I imagine every one of you give good advice to people. You give wonderful advice to coworkers, friends, family. How often do you take your own advice? That's all I'm saying. How often do you take your own advice? Life hurts, as we all know. Sometimes we need a hand up. We're willing to help somebody up, but why aren't we willing to let someone help us up? I don't know. I'm the same way. Somebody asked me once, what's the last thing you did for fun where you lost track of time? And I honestly didn't have an answer. That's sad. And I never even thought about that, but think about it. We don't have to do this alone. Your willingness, your willingness to, how you doing? Is everything okay? What can I do for you? Whatever your voice is, it can change a trajectory of thought. Literally, it could save a life. Don't be afraid to get involved. We have resources. I just can't make anybody access them. What I would love for you to do is, this is being recorded, so you'll have this, is take some of these numbers and put them in your phone. I mean, if you're talking to someone who is struggling and you don't know what to do, wouldn't it be nice to have a 24/7 resource? What if you're struggling? You don't know what to do. It'd be nice to have a 24/7 resource at your fingertips. We have resources. I just can't make anybody access them. And to be honest, it's one of the most frustrating things I deal with. As I said, I talk to a lot of youth. You know, we hear a lot about our youth and the suicide crisis and things like that, but the number one demographic, the highest number, is white males over 65, has the highest suicide rate. Why is that? Well, I'm a burden. I don't belong. I've overcome that aversion to self-harm. For whatever reason, what matters is what it means to that person. So if you got someone in your life, anyone that has recently experienced a loss of anything, there's no harm in asking how you're doing with it. Talk to them. And again, we don't need to overthink these things. There's no magic to it. It's just engaging and listening. That's kind of the basis of QPR. We get more involved. It takes about an hour and a half, but that's the basics. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is in a nutshell, what I wanted to tell you is not to be afraid to get involved. You are not going to plant a seed about suicide. Most individuals do tend to communicate that are having thoughts of suicide. They do tend to communicate their intent. The thing is that communication doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be obvious. It can be ugly. But anger is rarely, if ever, the first emotion. So if you notice a change, ask about it. It's okay. You're not going to plant a seed. And I also want to make an important point here. We tend to should on ourselves a lot. I should have said this. I should have done this. I should have. Please don't do that. Of course, when we look back, we can see what we should have done. But in the moment, you know, it's a whole different experience. You are not responsible for someone else's happiness. You're not responsible for someone else's actions. So please don't, if you've had experience with this, don't, I should have said this, I should have done this, I should have. Please don't do that. But from this point forward, trust your instincts, trust them. For whatever reason, if you just feel weird about what someone has said, something that's happened to them, something they've done, ask about it. Ask about it. And it could change a life. So with that, am I okay on time? Dad is watching me, I'm sure somewhere. And I got to tell you, the night my father passed, he died on Christmas Day. And you know what's weird? My dad found his father dead on Christmas Day. My grandfather died on Christmas Day. The night of his death, the EMTs that came were Rotarians, and they knew my dad. And they just said, it was the sweetest thing. They just sat with him until he passed, along with my mom and my sister who were there. So anyway, I appreciate being able to come talk to Rotary, talk to Rotarians, and Josh, thank you for letting it happen. It feels like a really short time, but please consider me a resource. If there are groups, if there are organizations you want me to speak to, I'm available. And that's what I do. I don't cost anything. I'll go weekends, evenings, whatever. But please consider me a resource, not only on the suicide side of things, but on the substance use side of things, disordered gambling and so forth. I am a resource for you. So with that, I thank you very, very much. I will stop sharing. And this is recorded, so you should be able to have access to these. And I thank you for your time very much.